When a reporter walked into the press conference, ready to ask his usual set of questions, he had no idea that this one encounter would take a turn he'd never forget. Randy Orton, known for his calm demeanor and sharp wit, had just finished a long and tiring week of promoting his latest wrestling match. But when the reporter, a bold young man with little to no filter, asked a question that made everyone in the room pause, Orton's reaction was swift, cold, and unrelenting. The question was about Christianity, something that had no business being brought up in a wrestling interview. But the reporter, perhaps trying to get a rise out of Orton, went ahead and insulted Christians in front of the cameras. "So, Randy, I'm curious," the reporter smirked. "Do you think it's time for people to stop hiding behind their religion? I mean, isn't it just a crutch for the weak?" The room went silent. People shifted in their seats, unsure of how Orton would react. But they all knew one thing. When it came to Randy Orton, you never really knew what would happen next. Without missing a beat, Orton's eyes narrowed, and the smile on his face faded into something colder, more dangerous. His voice, calm and controlled, cut through the silence. "You just made a huge mistake," he said, leaning forward, locking eyes with the reporter. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The reporter, unaware of the storm he'd just unleashed, laughed awkwardly, thinking Orton was just messing with him. But the look in Orton's eyes was dead serious. "No, I'm not messing with you," Orton continued, his voice dropping an octave, a clear warning in his tone. "What you just said crosses a line. You want to insult my religion? You think it's okay to mock something so sacred?" The reporter, realizing the gravity of his words, tried to backpedal, but it was too late. Orton stood up, his towering presence filling the space. "I don't care if you're here to make a name for yourself or stir up controversy, but you're not going to disrespect me, my beliefs, or the people who follow them. Not on my watch." The tension in the room reached a boiling point, and for a moment it felt like everyone was holding their breath. No one dared to speak, not even the other reporters who were watching the scene unfold. Orton's reputation for being a calculated and composed individual was well known, but this side of him was something else entirely. Something raw and untamed. The reporter, now visibly shaken, stammered, I didn't mean it like that, Randy. I was just..." But Orton cut him off, his words sharp like a blade. "Don't try to justify your disrespect now. The damage is done." He turned toward the rest of the press, addressing them all now. "And let this be a lesson. Don't ever think you can disrespect me or anyone else in this room without consequences. That's not how I operate. Not now, not ever." As Orton walked away, the reporter stood frozen in place, his face a mixture of embarrassment and realization. He had just learned the hard way that you don't mess with Randy Orton. Not when it comes to his faith, his family, or anything that matters to him. The press conference continued, but the energy in the room was different now. Everyone was talking about what had just happened. Orton's savage response had not only shut down the reporter, but had also made a powerful statement about respect. The wrestling world buzzed with stories about the moment, and it wasn't long before the video clips went viral. Orton's reputation as a fierce competitor inside the ring was already well established, but this was a side of him that fans hadn't seen before, and it left them in awe. People began to rally behind Orton, praising him for standing up for his beliefs and showing that he would not tolerate disrespect, no matter the situation. It was a lesson in integrity, in standing firm for what you believe in, even when the pressure is on. And for the reporter, well, he learned a valuable lesson too. Never underestimate the power of words, and never, ever disrespect a man like Randy Orton. The day after the press conference, the incident with Randy Orton and the reporter was still the talk of the wrestling world. Social media had exploded with clips, memes, and commentary from fans, analysts, and even other wrestlers. But what caught everyone's attention the most wasn't just Orton's fiery response. It was his silence afterward. He didn't tweet, didn't post anything on Instagram. For the first time in a long time, Randy Orton was nowhere to be found. In the days that followed, people began to speculate. Was Orton just enjoying the attention, or was there something more to this story? Some fans thought he'd simply made a statement and moved on. Others, though, felt that the response hinted at a deeper, more personal issue. It wasn't like Orton to be so publicly involved in anything outside of the ring. The wrestling world was used to his cool, calculated persona, a man of few words who let his actions speak for themselves. But now, this situation had stirred something in him, and no one was quite sure what it meant. As the speculation grew, so did the tension. Interviews with fellow wrestlers and commentators began to surface. Some praised Orton for sticking up for his beliefs, while others speculated that he was taking the whole thing too far. But no one seemed to have an answer. It was almost like everyone was waiting for Orton to make a move. They wanted him to either confirm their suspicions or shut the whole thing down. But Orton wasn't playing that game. Then, out of nowhere, a cryptic post appeared on his social media. A single picture, taken in black and white, showed him sitting on a bench in a quiet park, looking out into the distance. The caption was short and to the point. Respect is earned, not given. No explanation, no further details. Just those words, hanging there like a challenge. The internet went wild. Was this a direct jab at the reporter? Was Orton suggesting that respect, in any form, had to be earned, not just handed out freely? Fans dissected the image, trying to read between the lines. Some believed Orton was giving the reporter another lesson, while others saw it as a message to anyone who had doubted his character or questioned his values. Whatever it was clear that Orton had no intention of letting the incident fade into the background. He had made his point, and now he was letting the world figure it out for themselves. In the midst of all the noise, the reporter who had sparked the entire incident went quiet. His usual arrogance had evaporated, replaced with a sense of discomfort. He appeared in a few follow-up interviews, but he was noticeably careful with his words. The media had a field day trying to catch him slipping, but he remained cautious, almost apologetic in his tone. No one had seen him like this before. Was he truly remorseful, or was he just scared of facing the wrath of Orton again? Then, a week later, a new video dropped. It wasn't a wrestling match or a promo. It was an exclusive interview with the reporter himself. Sitting across from the interviewer, he looked a bit different. His posture was more reserved, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with a humility that was impossible to ignore. As the camera rolled, he was asked directly about his comments during the press conference. He paused for a long moment before speaking. "I messed up," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "I thought I could get away with pushing a boundary, testing a limit, and, well, I was wrong. What I said wasn't just disrespectful to Randy. It was disrespectful to a lot of people. And for that, I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but there was something more there. A deep realization that the line between being bold and being reckless was thin, and he had crossed it. As the interview continued, the reporter spoke about the backlash he faced. How fans and even some of his colleagues had criticized him for his words. But what struck everyone the most was when he finally admitted, "I didn't realize how much respect meant until I saw Randy stand up for what he believes in. I underestimated him, and I underestimated the power of his faith. It's not just about being a wrestler, being tough, or being in control. It's about standing for something bigger than yourself." The interview went viral, and it wasn't just the fans who were talking about it. Wrestlers, sports commentators, even people from outside the wrestling world began to weigh in. Many expressed admiration for the reporter's honesty, but the real impact was that everyone, from Orton's fans to his critics, had learned something from the whole ordeal. Randy Orton didn't need to respond to the reporter's apology. In fact, he didn't need to say anything at all. His actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. He had shown the world that standing up for your beliefs isn't just about being right, it's about being true to yourself. And in the process, he had not only silenced the reporter, but had forced everyone to reflect on the importance of respect, integrity, and the courage it takes to defend what you believe in. In the end, Orton didn't have to make a grand speech or apology. His response was simple, yet powerful. He earned respect through action, not through words. And that, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. The fallout from the press conference and the interview that followed continued to ripple through the wrestling world. Orton had made his point, but the reporter wasn't the only one feeling the weight of the moment. Fans, wrestlers, and people who had never watched a wrestling match before were talking about it. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone was watching to see what Orton would do next. But he remained silent, as if the whole ordeal didn't even matter anymore. It was as though he had already moved on. But for the fans, the intrigue only grew. A week after the interview, Orton finally posted something. This time, it wasn't a cryptic image or a throwaway line. It was a simple video, and it didn't look like it was meant for anyone but his fans. The camera focused on his face, his expression calm, even almost indifferent. He looked directly into the lens as if speaking to each person watching. Sometimes the loudest voice isn't the one that needs to be heard, he began, his voice low but steady. I don't need to explain myself. What happened wasn't for attention. It was about something bigger. You don't disrespect people's beliefs. Period. Orton paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. I've been in this business long enough to know that respect is earned. Not because you're famous, not because you're tough, but because you carry yourself in a way that shows you're not here to tear others down. You're here to build something up. The camera zoomed in slightly, and for a split second, Orton's eyes softened. I didn't get here by playing games with people's lives. I didn't get here by disrespecting others for the sake of a headline. If you want to be remembered, let it be for your actions, not your words. The video ended there, just as abruptly as it had started. But the message was clear. Orton wasn't in this for the drama. He wasn't looking for a fight. He had already fought those battles. This was about standing up for something that mattered. And it was something that fans could feel, deep down. It wasn't about religion or wrestling. It was about the core values of respect, integrity, and accountability. In the days following that video, Orton's fan base grew even stronger. The people who had once admired him for his in-ring abilities now saw him in a new light. They respected him not just for his athleticism, but for his character. Orton wasn't just a wrestler. He was a man who stood firm on what he believed in, no matter the consequences. And that made him a legend in the eyes of those who followed him. Meanwhile, the reporter tried to move on. But no matter how hard he tried to escape the shadow of that moment, it followed him. He had become a symbol of what happens when you cross the line. The public perception of him had changed, and not for the better. His interviews became more scrutinized. Every word he said was now measured. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, as if the wrestling world was waiting for him to slip up again. But the real challenge came when he was invited back to the same press room where the original incident had taken place. The pressure was suffocating. Everyone in the room knew what had happened, and no one was going to let him forget it. The atmosphere was tense, and the room felt smaller, more confined. The reporter stood in front of the cameras, trying to muster up his usual bravado, but it was clear that his confidence had been shattered. The interviewer asked a simple question. "How do you feel now, after everything that's happened?" For a moment, the reporter said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "I was wrong. That day, I made a mistake. I let my pride and arrogance get in the way of my professionalism. I didn't think about the bigger picture. I thought I could get away with pushing someone's buttons for the sake of a story. But that wasn't fair to Randy, and it wasn't fair to the people who look up to him. It wasn't the apology anyone had expected. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't loaded with excuses. It was just the truth." The reporter had come face to face with his own mistakes and had decided to own up to them, not just for his career, but for himself. The moment was powerful, not because of the reporter's words, but because of the recognition he showed. He had learned something through all of this, and for the first time, he wasn't just trying to spin things in his favor. He was simply telling the truth. In a world full of half-truths and media manipulation, it was a rare moment of honesty. And as for Randy Orton, well, the silence that had surrounded him for so long now felt like a declaration of victory. His actions had done the talking, his message had been received loud and clear, and now he could move forward unbothered by the noise. He had set the record straight, not with anger or force, but with the kind of strength that spoke volumes. The story wasn't just about a wrestler shutting down a reporter. It was about the power of respect and the strength it takes to defend what you believe in. Orton had reminded everyone that the loudest voices aren't always the ones that matter. Sometimes, it's the quiet strength that leaves the most lasting impact. And in this case, it was Randy Orton's unwavering silence and simple message that spoke the loudest. As the weeks passed, Randy Orton's silence seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. Fans still talked about his response, the way he had stood his ground against the reporter and the media. But there was something else now. Something more. The people who admired Orton began to feel like they had witnessed something deeper than just a confrontation. It wasn't just about a wrestler defending his faith, or even his reputation. It was about a man who had the strength to be true to himself in a world that constantly tried to force him to conform. Orton's brand had always been built around his presence, his calculated movements in the ring, and his ability to manipulate his opponents. But now, he had a new level of respect. It wasn't the kind of respect you could earn by winning matches or creating buzz. This was the kind that came from standing firm in your convictions, regardless of the consequences. In a rare move, Orton granted a one-on-one interview with a respected sports journalist. The interview was expected to be a typical back and forth about upcoming matches, personal goals, and the usual fluff. But when the camera started rolling, it was clear that this was going to be different. Orton wasn't just talking about wrestling. He wasn't even talking about himself. "You know, I've been doing this for a long time," he began, his voice calm but unwavering. "A lot of people think they know me. They think they've figured me out based on what they see in the ring or what they hear in the media. But the truth is, there's more to everyone than what's on the surface." The journalist nodded, sensing that this interview was going to be more personal than he had anticipated. "You get asked all the time about your career, your achievements, and your legacy," the journalist continued, leaning in slightly. "But what about this? This situation with the reporter? How did that change things for you?" Orton's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained composed. "It wasn't about changing anything. It wasn't about some grand moment where I suddenly become a hero. It was about standing up for something I believe in. When you do that, you don't need a reward or a pat on the back. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's all there is to it." The words hit like a hammer. There was no bravado, no showmanship, just truth. Orton wasn't out to make a spectacle of himself. He wasn't even interested in proving anyone wrong. He was simply speaking his mind, sharing a lesson learned over years of experience. The journalist, clearly moved, pressed on. "So, is this something you think people miss about you? That there's more to Randy Orton than just the persona we see on TV?" Orton paused for a moment, considering the question. Then he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I've spent a lot of my life making people believe in one version of me. The legend killer. The Viper. But the truth is, I'm a lot more than that. Everyone is. We all have layers. We all have sides of us that people don't get to see. And sometimes, it takes something like this, a moment of reckoning, to really understand who you are." The interview continued, but the air had shifted. The fans, the media, everyone who tuned in could feel it. Randy Orton wasn't just a wrestler anymore. He wasn't a villain or a hero. He was a man who had come to terms with who he was, flaws and all, and that made him more relatable than ever before. As the interview ended, Orton stood up, offering the journalist a handshake. "I appreciate you letting me speak my mind," he said. The handshake was firm, but there was something different in it now. It wasn't just a professional exchange. It was the handshake of someone who had nothing left to prove. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to unfold. The reporter, now out of the spotlight, began to rebuild his career. But it wasn't just about regaining his status. It was about rebuilding his integrity. He had apologized, yes, but more importantly, he had listened. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that true growth didn't come from being right. It came from being honest. Randy Orton, on the other hand, had already moved past the drama. He was focused on his next match, his next challenge. But there was something different about him. Fans noticed it in his matches, in his interactions with others. He wasn't just the same old Orton. He was someone who had come through a storm, someone who had learned something about the world and about himself. And as for the wrestling world, it had shifted too. Orton's message had been heard, not just by his fans, but by the entire industry. In a business that often thrives on drama, spectacle, and conflict, Randy Orton had shown that the most powerful thing you could do was stand firm in your own truth. No gimmicks. No personas. Just raw, unapologetic authenticity. When Orton finally made his return to the ring after the incident, there was a different energy about him. The fans, who once cheered for his athleticism, now cheered for something deeper. They cheered for the man who had shown them that respect, integrity, and staying true to yourself were the things that truly mattered. In that moment, Orton's greatest victory wasn't a pinfall or a championship belt. It was the realization that he had earned something far more valuable than fame or titles. He had earned the respect of those who mattered most, his fans, his peers, and most importantly, himself. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered. The weeks that followed saw Randy Orton embrace a quieter kind of power. His matches were still electrifying, his presence in the ring undeniable, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. His fans, the ones who had supported him through every era of his career, noticed it first. It wasn't just about the RKO anymore, or the intensity he brought to his fights. It was about something deeper. He had always been a fighter, but now he seemed to be fighting for something greater than himself. As Orton continued his career, the media outlets that once saw him as a controversial figure began to portray him in a different light. No longer was he simply the Viper or the Legend Killer. He had become a symbol of personal growth, redemption, and, above all, integrity. Fans weren't just watching him to see him win, they were watching him to learn from him. His journey had sparked something inside of them, a realization that no matter the obstacles, no matter the missteps, you could always find a way to rise above. But not everyone saw it that way. There were still those who, with their minds fixed on the old image of Randy Orton, continued to see him through a lens of negativity. Some criticized him for changing. Some said he had lost the edge that made him a fan favorite in the first place. The reporter, for his part, was one of them. He couldn't help but wonder, was this new version of Orton still the same man who had once dominated the ring with ruthless abandon? And yet, in the back of his mind, he knew the answer. Yes, Orton was still the same. He hadn't lost his edge. He had found a new one. The fire that once burned with anger now burned with purpose. The raw, untamed aggression had evolved into a force for good, something that didn't rely on the chaos of the past to make an impact. Orton had transcended the persona that people had labeled him with, and it was undeniable. Still, the question lingered. What would happen if Orton had to confront his past again? What would happen if the very people who had once tried to tear him down came after him once more? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. In a surprising twist, a rival wrestler, who had been absent from the scene for a while, made a return to WWE. This man, known for his sharp tongue and a history of animosity with Orton, wasted no time in stirring the pot. He took to social media, posting inflammatory comments about Orton's recent behavior, claiming that he had sold out and was no longer the man fans had once adored. He didn't stop there. He called out Orton, challenging him to a match that would settle the score once and for all. The challenge hung in the air for days. Fans were divided. Some supported Orton, insisting that the man they respected had every right to change and evolve. Others sided with the returning rival, believing that Orton's redemption arc was a publicity stunt, a way to keep himself relevant in an industry that was quick to forget you. The media ran wild with speculation. Would Orton take the bait? Would he allow himself to be dragged back into the drama? But Orton's response wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't fire back with insults or threats. He didn't need to. Instead, he took a different approach. He posted a short, cryptic message. It's not about the fight. It's about the reason you fight. The message was clear. Orton wasn't fighting for personal glory or to prove anything to his critics. He wasn't going to let the past dictate his future. He had already faced down his demons. His victory had already been won. Not in the ring, but in his heart. The challenge was accepted, and the build-up to the match was intense. The rival wrestler, with his trash talk and his attempts to tear Orton down, only made the anticipation stronger. But with each passing day, Orton remained focused. He didn't respond to the insults or the taunts. He simply did what he always did, trained, prepared, and stayed true to his mission. This match wasn't about winning or losing. It was about showing that his transformation was real. When the night of the match arrived, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd was buzzing, divided between those who supported Orton and those who believed his rival would finally put him in his place. But there was a certain calmness about Orton as he walked down the ramp. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't shouting. He was walking toward his destiny, confident in the man he had become. The match itself was brutal. Both men brought their A-game, their fists and bodies colliding with a force that shook the arena. But even in the heat of battle, Orton never lost sight of what he had come to understand about himself. He wasn't fighting to reclaim his title as the most dangerous man in the business. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting to prove that he was more than just the sum of his past. The match reached its climax when, in a move that stunned the audience, Orton hit his opponent with a devastating RKO. The crowd erupted as Orton covered him for the pin. The referee counted 1, 2, 3. Orton had won. But as he stood up and looked around the arena, it wasn't the cheers or the lights that mattered most. It was the realization that he had proven something far more important than his dominance in the ring. He had proven that you could change. You could grow. And no matter how much the world tried to pull you back into your old self, you could always choose to move forward. As the final bell rang and Orton's hand was raised in victory, a new chapter of his story was written. It wasn't just about the victories or the titles. It was about the strength to evolve, to stand tall no matter the obstacles, and to be true to yourself. And as Orton walked back up the ramp, the message was clear for everyone watching. Real strength wasn't in the fists or the moves. It was in knowing who you were and having the courage to stay that way.